Welcome to D2P, Too Lazy to Watch or Read, where heartfelt and meaningful stories are retold in a short yet captivating way. Today, let's dive into the opening of a recently popular novel, When the Phone Rings Part 1, Chapter 1 to 10. What happened was a broadcasting mishap. It was truly a record-breaking torrential rain. With the longest continuous rainfall in history, a nearby mountain collapsed. A small problem had occurred. The origin of the issue is a small oval, taking up a 16th of the screen, approximately. Heejoo, the sign language interpreter, occupied that space. Currently, the frame was frozen where she was flicking her middle finger. What the? From outside the studio, she could faintly hear the director standing up and yelling through the thick glass wall. Suddenly realization hit Heejoo, and she forced herself to continue. Her expression never wavered as she looked at the prompter. But 1 second, 2 seconds, 3 seconds passed. Yet the frame was stuck. I'm screwed. The prompter was still aggressively displaying the word mountain. Meanwhile, the control room was in utter chaos. Thankfully, the screen soon transitioned to a reporter's live field report. Finally, Heejoo exhaled, wiping her flushed face. "Miss Interpreter, are you okay?" Heejoo gave a blank nod. "I think I need some medicine." The director was still nervously bowing repeatedly as he seemed to explain the situation to higher-ups. Technically, she was supposed to have her middle and thumb fingers open to sign mountain, but due to a technical difficulty, the frame froze when only her middle finger was up. It would be ideal if this mistake were accepted as an unforeseen error, but often, the louder voices won. And just as expected, the director came back with a darkened expression after his call ended. "Heejoo, I'm really sorry, but..." Breaking news. At that moment, the control room door burst open with a bang and the assistant director rushed in. Due to a kidnapping case, the Blue House spokesperson is giving an emergency briefing. What? They've sent a direct order from the Blue House requesting simultaneous broadcast on all stations. The director's expression immediately changed, and he quickly put on the headset that was loosely hanging around his neck. Get the breaking news caption up. The deep navy background took over the screen where the logo of the Blue House dominated. The spokesperson of the Blue House appeared, erasing the previously awkward atmosphere like a wave. He was dressed in a flawlessly tailored black suit, and his sharp eyes were focused straight to the camera. Heejoo watched him without even breathing. "Heejoo, could you do a live interpretation right now?" The director trailed off, sounding hesitant. "I'm sorry. Let's talk about it later." He hurriedly withdrew with an awkward look on his face. "We'll proceed with the Blue House briefing without sign language interpretation." Heejoo began to get a sense of what the director was going to say. "Am I going to be replaced?" A bitter taste overlapped her mouth as Heejoo stood up and grabbed her bag from the corner of the studio. Perhaps it was because, as a child, she couldn't speak due to aphasia, but at times, the world around her felt like an aquarium. Growing up in this muffled world, Heejoo learned to speak with her hands. This one job suited her well, but now even that has gone wrong. "Good evening, this is Geon, spokesperson of the Blue House." A low, firm voice stopped Heejoo in her tracks. Her heart skipped a beat, as it did every time. Geon's gaze, locked on the camera, was both fierce and unyielding. His dark hair and eyes contrasted sharply with his cold, pale skin. The man delivering the words of highest authority possessed many qualities she lacked. An exceptional political talent with astute instincts of a confident orator. He was famously quoted as saying, "Don't think of the government as a plaything," in reference to the lax attitude of reporters. The president required a tenacious spokesperson, as every press interaction was a high-stakes confrontation. The youngest ever Blue House spokesperson, he maintained his position without blemish or threat of removal. While past spokespersons had a high turnover rate, often resigning or being dismissed due to corruption, harassment, external pressure, or controversial statements, Geon had an unblemished record, entirely free from scandal or rumor. "Now, I will share the Blue House's stance on this matter." His grip tightened on the podium as he inclined towards the microphone. His gaze, steady and intense, was fixed upon the audience. Even the briefest silences were purposeful, a calculated display of authority. At the age of 35, he commanded public opinion with a skill that seemed almost innate, a legacy inherited from his distinguished family. He was born for this. Geon, in himself, was authority. There will be no negotiation with the kidnappers regarding a ransom. His piercing gaze made Heejoo flinch. "Don't delude yourself into thinking we're a couple." Those ruthless words overlapped with the disdain in his voice. You were sent as a hostage to my side. The last time they had a conversation was ironically the first day of their marriage. For 3 years, they existed in a state of silent estrangement, their roles as spouses reduced to mere formalities. From the start, Heejoo had barely spoken, and her husband treated her as if she were invisible. Their 70-square-meter newlywed home was always chillingly cold, and she saw her husband more on TV than in their house. Can this be termed as a deeply unhappy marriage? We will not, under any circumstances, compromise on the principles we must uphold. Heejoo habitually fiddled with her bare finger without a ring, and yet, she couldn't take her eyes off her husband, who she held resentment against. She had foolishly clung to her feelings for him since their first encounter. Dear, don't you think it's time to quit your job? Heejoo paused, her grip tightening around the steaming teacup before releasing it. Having ignored her mother's persistent calls, she had inadvertently found herself in a sudden meeting with her mother-in-law. Her mother-in-law, a professor at Korea University from a family of scholars, and her mother, the former top singer of Club Siren who eventually became the chairman's legal wife after being his mistress. What an odd pair they made. And now, for some reason, these two were sitting together, hounding her. In a month, the election campaign will kick off. So, you should quit your job and join your father-in-law's campaign. Although her mother-in-law's tone was soft, Heejoo felt an instant headache. With Seon working in the Blue House, he won't be able to participate in the election campaign. But if you join, you'll be a strong ally. Heejoo clenched her tingling hand. A marriage was arranged between a major newspaper seeking a kingmaker and her father-in-law, the next major presidential candidate. Baek Seon's family was involved in politics. Their sole objective was to secure a presidential victory, a goal that had eluded the grandfather 3 times. To solidify this alliance, Heejoo was, temporarily, sent as a political pawn. As the day before the wedding, Baek Seon's real fiancée, one of the main protagonists, Heejoo's stepsister, had vanished. Heejoo was forced into a humiliating marriage contract, one that completely put her at a disadvantage. There was no wedding dress, no bouquet, just lawyers and paperwork. The bride cannot initiate divorce. Divorce is especially prohibited during the presidential election period. If she broke even one of these terms, she would incur a 2 billion won penalty. As Baek Seon said, Heejoo was a hostage. Honey, just support your father-in-law. After all, that's the only thing you can do. I plan to officially announce that our daughter-in-law is a sign language interpreter. Heejoo's fingertips twitched suddenly. Then our family's reputation will also shine, making us more relatable to the public. Not to mention the general sentiment. She felt stuffy and reined her drawn-out anger. Helplessness overcame her, as Heejoo didn't have the strength to break out of this suffocating aquarium. Moreover, honey, you can't speak. I heard you lived alienated in your room during your childhood. Heejoo's mother's hand, which had been lifting the teacup, paused slightly. Isn't that perfect? Having a flaw that people can sympathize with is quite an attractive trait for a politician. Heejoo didn't show any fluctuations. Her apathy was fortified and emotions long scraped away after becoming the second daughter of Songyong Daily at the age of 9. She found it amusing that even her misfortunes could be a trophy for someone. I heard your aphasia improved quite a bit since you were young. She replied, yes, but no sound came out. Her mother-in-law smiled as if it was okay. It's better if you can't speak. Heejoo glanced at her mother, but Kim Yun-hee ignored the words and kept sipping her tea. It was interesting to see her keep a facade even when recalling the incident that caused Heejoo to become mute. It will be in a month, so be prepared. 30 days. A month. There's only a month left. Suddenly, her heart felt heavy. Even after her mother-in-law left, her heart kept pounding. As her body throbbed with pain, she realized she had forgotten her medicine. Instantly, the symptoms of suffocation and disorientation kicked in, but she clenched her eyes shut, trying to ride out the moment. It's nothing. Just keep taking breaths. It takes a lot of effort to breathe freely, but Heejoo wanted to brush it off as nothing mentally. She wanted to make her belief a reality. A strong hand grabbed her forearm. What did you do at the broadcast today? Why are you making me embarrassed in front of your in-laws? All she wanted was to take her medicine and sleep. Heejoo glanced at the clock with a weary expression. Her longtime therapist had diagnosed her with chronic apathy and episodes of speech blockage as a result of depression. Even her digestion issues and chest pains were attributed to suppressed rage, but Heejoo felt nothing. She had been burdened with those weights since she was too young to know any difference. All you have to do is live quietly. Is that so hard for you to do so? You'll be the president's daughter-in-law in a few months. Why are you spacing out? What's your problem? Her arm was shaken vigorously. This is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity for you, and you couldn't even snag Baek Sayon yet. The enticing curve of her mother's lips twisted with venom. You must have inherited half of your mother's fate. Her fingertips turned cold. She could endure anything else, but it was difficult to endure words that hit the mark. Heejoo felt like she was barely holding back a bomb that was about to explode. The fact that she resembled her mother, or the fact that she wasn't loved by her husband. Unlike her mother, Heejoo didn't know which was harder to bear. Heejoo's answer, which immediately brought Baek Sayon to mind, was very clear. Her torn heart was so insignificant that only her throat felt sore. Quit your job as soon as possible and just follow your in-laws. I'll talk to him and try to get today's video deleted. So, why do they keep pushing me? I'm trying so hard to keep myself together. I'm trying to live quietly even though it makes me feel sick. I'm so tired of suffocating myself in this abyss. At that moment, her mother stopped mid-sentence, casting an odd look at Heejoo. Why are you looking at me like that? Heejoo looked at her own outline reflected in the polished marble wall. She was grinning, but her face was frozen in a grotesque smile, and her eyes appeared lifeless. As soon as she got into the car, an unknown chill swept over her. She opened the glove compartment and found the medicine bottle first. She swallowed the pills without water and turned on the navigation. A monotonous mechanical sound made her chuckle. Destination? The cold, loveless newlywed house was no different from a coffin. So this navigation system was guiding her to her death. Heejoo turned the steering wheel with a dark expression and turned on the radio. But why isn't it working? The radio was completely dead. Is this radio also mocking me? Sigh. She focused on the road instead of letting frustration consume her. Resignation and surrender were what she excelled at, and everyone expected it from her. After all, she wasn't Songyong's real daughter. She was the child brought in by a remarried mother, and now a stand-in for her sister, whom she has no blood ties with. All these rumors made her a laughable target. Now you're hearing JBS radio station. Even if you're stuck inside, I'll make your day happier. The announcer's voice, the station's theme song, pop music, commercial jingles, they all mixed, randomly skipping, sounding like some kind of corrupted file. Heejoo tapped the panel board in surprise, but it had no effect. Listen. Hello, this is DJ Shin. Today's Blue House spokesperson. Hostage. Murder. Strangely, the volume seemed to grow louder and the disjointed frequencies sounded like a single ominous message. She tried turning it off, but nothing worked. What is going on today? The day felt unending. From the studio to now, nothing had gone right. After frantically tapping the control panel, she slumped into her seat. The Blue House spokesperson today, Jack Hayes' Outrun Myself, is up next. Hostage, hostage. She angrily pounded the dashboard, triggering the wipers. Why is this happening? Simultaneously, the GPS reset, blaring a red alert. You've deviated from the route. You've deviated from the route. You've deviated from the route. The stern voice echoing repeatedly felt eerie. What the hell? She tried to pull over, but the car was no longer under her control. The relentless rain made it impossible to see ahead. Though the wipers swept continuously, the water kept flowing. The car drove toward an unknown destination, then abruptly screeched to a halt. The car spun half a turn on the slippery road, sliding across the wet pavement. Heejoo's body slammed into the steering wheel. Ouch! She winced while rubbing her chest. Just then, she heard a distinct sound. Click, click. The backseat lock clicked open and then closed again. But I didn't touch anything. Her neck stiffened, and her whole body froze. Could I be? Am I trapped? Am I being? Suddenly, the heavy sound of rain, like a barrage, filled her ears, drowning out all other noises. That sound was a trigger. Heejoo, now in panic, frantically grabbed the door handle, yanking it as if she had gone mad. But every button, every mechanism, was completely malfunctioning. The lock wouldn't release, and her hands grew red from pounding on the window. She even threw her frail body against the door. Ugh. But the isolation was too intense to ignore. She would have given anything just to reach that cold newlywed house. Suddenly, Heejoo stopped ramming herself against the door and instinctively grabbed the steering wheel. A line from a script she had once translated into sign language on a broadcast suddenly flashed through her mind. Did my car get hacked? If the controllers inside a car get hacked, someone could manipulate the ignition, locks, black box, travel route, radio, air conditioner, engine, brakes, and more. Heejoo wasn't sure if her car was hacked and sabotaged. If so, who would do such a thing? Who ordered it? My in-laws are very famous people, so they naturally have a lot of enemies. Thinking like that, a lot of suspicious people came to my mind, like political rivals who clashed with my father-in-law, or groups with grudges against the Songyong Daily. But out of all my relatives, why would they target me? Her pursed lips loosened in despair. Am I destined to be a pawn? At the same time, the white headlights pierced her retinas like a knife. Heejoo instinctively shut her eyes tightly and raised her hand. Something was coming straight at her. Heejoo pressed the gas pedal desperately, but the car wouldn't move. To be precise, a massive dump truck was accelerating down the slippery road toward her. Don't come. Panic made Heejoo suddenly speak up. Her own voice, echoing in the confined space, felt strangely unfamiliar. She pounded on the steering wheel and blared the horn. A powerful sense of dread overcame her, and the scent of D*ADH was gradually enveloping her. As the blinding headlights neared, Heejoo could only think of one sinister face. The aggressive camera flashes continued till Baek Saeon entered the room and shut the door with a bang. His eyes narrowed as he singled out a few reporters who were not behaving themselves, even though it was a non-press briefing. Soon the atmosphere became tense. Saeon was the most prominent man in the Blue House, the youngest and the most elite. I am about to share sensitive information with the people present. Despite having hundreds of hawk-like gazes, Saeon remained nonchalant. In fact, his sharpened, intense eyes had a frightening gleam. The kidnapper groups and our government are communicating indirectly through the media. The briefing room murmured. They are watching our press coverage and adjusting their stance accordingly. While standing at the blue podium, his usually cold face became even sterner. Therefore, I urge all media outlets to exercise caution in their reporting. Please avoid posting personal grievances or government criticisms that could be misconstrued by armed groups. He rolled up his sleeve and glanced at his watch. 5:02 p.m. As of this moment, the government is enforcing a temporary media blackout. What does that mean? The stunned reporters murmured. An embargo? Is this an embargo? Is the situation that serious? Spokesperson, you know this infringes on the public's right to know. Does the government really desire this? Should we take your words as it is? We're not parrots. Are we just supposed to repeat whatever you feed us? Spokesperson, isn't this suppressing journalistic independence and editorial freedom? Even as the reporters laughed sarcastically and raised their voices, Baek Saeon did not blink. He simply observed the reporters with the same expression he had when he entered. Standing calmly like the eye of a storm, he muttered, I'm doing this because your careless writing might get the hostages killed. But he continued speaking calmly, please wait until the negotiations are complete. There's no extra room for interference in this negotiation. Don't ruin it by crying about your right to know. And let's get this straight. You're not doing this to learn the truth. You're doing it for personal gain. The thrill of writing, the desire for attention, driven by some kind of superiority complex. No citizen wants to hear news of a hostage being brutally slaughtered. So don't disgustingly mask your frustration and disappointment as if it's for the public good. A frosty jab deflated the boiling atmosphere. Life is more important than knowledge, and stirring things up at the risk of human life is not a right, it's cruelty. At least in this case. Just understand that your silence right now will save our citizens who have been taken hostage, and willingly support the negotiation team on site, so they can do their job without distraction. His grip on the microphone tightened. If anyone here screws up with their wording and another hostage ends up dead, the sound was muffled by his hand over the microphone, but the reporters understood Baek Saeon's warning clearly. As soon as Baek Saeon finished the briefing and stepped out, an aide quickly handed over his belongings. Sir, your phone has been ringing non-stop. Without replying, Baek Saeon strode away with long steps. The phone was almost hot from the number of calls it had received. Hundreds of calls from media outlets, alternating between familiar and unfamiliar numbers, had flooded in. The battery was draining just from sitting idle. Send me the negotiation team's timeline as soon as it's updated. But sir, why didn't you go there yourself? What do you mean? Baek Saeon's icy gaze spurred the aide to speak quickly. I meant the on-site negotiation team. Isn't that normally your specialty? Your mother was the country's first negotiator, and you have a master's in political science, plus you've been trained in hostage negotiation by the FBI. Baek Saeon didn't spare another glance at the junior staffer, who knew his resume inside out. His steady pace remained unchanged. And I heard the president secretly hoped you would go. Enough with the chatter. The insistent ringing of the phone shattered the silence. Baek Saeon yanked at his tie. Frustration was evident. Saeon couldn't simply turn it off. He furrowed his brows in irritation, but habitually memorized the number. His dry eyes glanced briefly at the aggravating screen and then looked away. The battery was only at 5% anyway. He almost wished it would die and go dark for good. Am I dead? Did I just die and come back to life? The massive dump truck barreled past, narrowly missing the car. The side mirrors shattered, and the door caved in from the force of the impact. I lay there, paralyzed with fear, my face pale. I was hesitant to move. Heejoo slumped over the steering wheel, gasping for air. Already, various parts of her body ached, and her sweat-soaked clothes were damp and uncomfortable. Can I even make it home safely? My eyes were already glazed with fatigue, and my hands were shaking so badly that I couldn't even grip the steering wheel. But who? Suddenly, her hair stood on end. Out of instinct, she glanced at the rearview mirror, feeling a strange sensation as if something was scratching at the back of her neck. And the moment she made eye contact with a man who looked like a homeless person, she gasped. Ah! Before she could scream, a figure crawled out of the trunk and lunged over the back seat. The man, who had been smirking, clamped a hand over Heejoo's mouth. His arm came around from behind, pinning her head against the seat. A pungent, sour smell filled the air. Fug. Are you surprised, sis? Everything happened in an instant. Her attempt to ask who he was muffled by the hand covering her mouth. The man reeked faintly of paint thinner. Her body began to tremble like an aspen tree. Right. It should be Baek Sayeon. Baek soon. Let's call him. I know his number. I know Baek Sayeon's number. Baek Sayeon's phone. Yes, we have to call. His bushy curls bobbed as he inclined his body towards the driver's seat. You're now the hostage. A hostage? You know the people on the radio had been saying something about hostages nowadays. So you be the hostage, and I'll be the demander. Like the one who makes the call. Starting navigation. The navigation system, which had been reset, automatically set a destination and displayed a roadmap. Sis, you drive. And I'll make the call. Heejoo complied, extending her hand to grasp the steering wheel. Do what I tell you. Don't stop till we reach the destination. The hot breath brushing her ear felt revolting. Confined with an unknown and clearly unstable individual, Heejoo was overcome with terror. Her sweaty palms rotated the wheel. Beep, beep. The familiar tone of the dialing phone drew her attention. The man, holding a rather large telephone, placed it on speakerphone. Beep, beep. As the tone dragged on, the man started trembling like an alcoholic going through withdrawal. Beep, beep. Although Heejoo was aware of his increasingly ragged breathing, she kept her eyes firmly fixed on the road ahead. Yes, this is Baek Sung. The sound of his voice caused her to tremble. Despite the tenuous nature of their marital relationship, his voice still evoked a strong emotional response. A choked sob escaped her lips, but her mouth was only clamped down harder. If you don't speak, I'll hang up. Sayeon's weary tone suggested that he was getting irritated. The kidnapper's lips twitched in annoyance. Baek Sayeon, what would I mean? This doesn't seem to be a Korean number. Seon's voice moved slightly away, then closer again. It sounded like he was double-checking the number. Hey, Lise, listen. Who are you? Baek Sayeon asked stiffly. Please identify yourself. Kill. I'll kill her. I kidnapped her. Your wife. I'm going to kill her. The kidnapper's voice turned louder as he rambled on. Heejoo moved towards the center and tried to take control of the wheel. Her back was already drenched in a cold sweat. There was a chilling silence over the receiver. I thought I heard a short chuckle, followed by the words, "What kind of nonsense?" and then a short expletive, but I couldn't be sure. I don't engage in phishing calls. With a sarcastic retort, he hung up. The kidnapper spat on the floor and slammed his head into the compartment box in disbelief. But Heejoo felt the impending horror. Arg. Sis. Listen to me. The man gritted his teeth. If Baek Sayeon keeps doing this, if he hangs up on me again, if he ignores me again, I'll kill you. Heejoo sucked in a sobbing breath and swallowed. Do you know where we're going now? Here. Look at the map. We're heading to the lake. I turned my eyes to the screen and saw the address. You're going to end up in the water, he chuckled. Baek Sayeon should show some curiosity for you to survive. I'm really screwed, Heejoo thought again. I turned my eyes to the screen and saw the address. You're going to end up in the water, he chuckled. Baek Sayeon should show some curiosity for you to survive. I'm really screwed, Heejoo thought again. Sir, is something wrong? Baek Sayeon, engrossed in his thoughts, remained focused on his phone, disregarding his aide's query. Should I charge your phone? The aide, perceptive and eager to please, was hardly on his radar. Baek Sayeon's phone number was public knowledge, especially among political reporters. But a few years ago, when someone who left the journalism field leaked his number, he had to deal with all kinds of pranks and threatening calls. Baek Sayeon had stopped changing his number to avoid calls from madmen. Instead, he just blocked numbers relentlessly. It's no wonder he was called the impenetrable shield of the house. Nothing could make him waver. But one word from the caller kept bothering him. Sayeon pressed his throbbing temples. That girl. She was 6 years younger than me. I couldn't forget her curious eyes when she was looking at me in my elementary school uniform. However, no one had ever called claiming to know his wife. Not even once. The man with the furrowed brow snorted and dialed somewhere. Yes, sir. The person Baek called was the head of the house, who was in charge of scheduling. What is Hong Heejoo's schedule for today? He had never inquired like this before and got straight to the point without even a greeting. An appointment with my mother. Yes, understood. He repeated the information he got from the other side. So, she was meeting his mother at Chairman Hong's house. But the uneasy feeling didn't go away, so he tapped his fingers on the table. He turned his phone back on. Mother, what time did you leave Chairman Hong's house today? She's probably still at home. No, it's fine. Good night. Baek Sayeon's suspicion wasn't quenched, so he made another call. This is Baek Sayeon. Yes, how have you been? Is Heejoo there right now? Would his in-laws know something? His mother-in-law chuckled confidently, certain that his wife would be well cared for, as women often feel most at ease in their maternal home. She's fine, then. Of course she's fine, his mother-in-law said proudly. After ending the 3 calls, Baek Sayeon tightened his once loose tie. How could anyone know? Am I reading into it too much? It should be a typical phishing scam. What? His aide was startled. 406 to 000 to 1290. He recited the numbers dryly, resting his chin on his hand. Trace that number. What? Did you memorize it? That. 406 to 000 to 1290. 406 000 minus 1290. The aide repeated the number as the office line rang loudly. The fumbling junior aide grabbed the receiver quickly. Yes, I'll notify him. Through the window, rain continued to pour, and a shadow was cast on Baek Sayeon's face. Sir, they need you on the hotline right away. The Argani government has reached out for urgent communication. They're waiting for you. Baek Sayeon glanced at his phone, which was down to 4% battery, before finally jamming it into his pocket. Beep, beep. Another call signal went through. Answer it, answer it, answer it. The kidnapper kept calling like crazy, but none of the calls went through. His face had turned red due to anger, and he started kicking Heejoo's seat relentlessly. Should I scream? If Baek Sayeon answered, she could beg him to help, to save her. But would he even recognize her voice? After all, Heejoo had failed her sign language interpreter's exam 3 times because her voice just wouldn't come out. If she spoke, he would probably think it was a fake. This bastard. He's ignoring me again. Seized by a fit of rage, the kidnapper clambered into the passenger seat and began to search beneath it. A moment later, he pulled something with a scrape, and suddenly, a knife was in his hands. Why is that in my car? How long has it been there? Answer, 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 answer. With a crazed look in his eyes, the man jabbed the headrest beside her repeatedly. Ryip. The torn leather hung in tatters like fish scales, and the metallic sound made her right ear freeze with fear. The blade was pressed so close to her ear that if it had been even slightly closer, it would have pierced through. Heejoo exhaled a shaky breath through pale lips. The kidnapper banged his head against the window while repeatedly calling. This man is completely unhinged. Her hands shook along with the wheel as she tried to stay steady amidst his erratic mood swings. Beep, beep. Please, just answer already. Just as she began wishing for it, the kidnapper's face suddenly went cold. His excitement was replaced with an abrupt calmness. Ah, sis, I made a mistake. I totally forgot. He played with the phone, showing a broad smile. I didn't modulate my voice. Despite the foul odor, his profile was youthful and well-defined. His creepy eyes and sudden emergence from the trunk were terrifying, but his fingers danced across the phone with practiced ease. What happens if they catch me, sis? He didn't seem worried at all. This phone has no SIM card. I modified it. Modified it by myself. So it can't be traced. It's a burner anyway. They can't trace it. Since the knife had sunk into her headrest, Heejoo kept her eyes on the road, refusing to look away. There's a small device installed, like what the police use for secure communications. I put it in here. It doesn't use signals, but can directly call Baek Sayeon. All calls lead to him. I even put a voice modulator here. Heejoo gulped in fear as this kidnapper was far more thorough than she had imagined. It's an internet-based American number, but it's untraceable because I manipulated the caller ID myself. The VPN reroutes in real time, so you can only use it for 10 minutes. Baek Sayeon, his voice. The dialing tone cut off again. I want to hear him talking. The car fell silent after the beeping of countless missed calls. Pick up, pick up, pick up. Damn it. He dialed again with bloodshot eyes. The man was on the verge of losing control. At this rate, what would happen if I jerked the steering wheel? My bag and phone were already pinned under the kidnapper's body. What if I just slammed it into something and escaped? Heejoo squinted through the blurry windshield, glancing around. If only she could get out of this desolate place, and someone else could report a car accident. Heejoo twisted the wheel and veered off the road. Damn it, The kidnapper lurched to the side and dropped his phone. His eyes flashed with fury as he violently yanked her hair. A wide blade pressed against her cheekbone. The monotonous hold tone and the rhythmic drumming of rain merged into a single, relentless beat. Are you out of your mind, sis? Ugh. A sharp pain shot through her scalp, forcing her to gasp. It's useless. Heejoo found her own dry voice unfamiliar. There was no room for hesitation anymore. Baek Sayeon won't negotiate. Why? You're his wife, aren't you? Aren't you his family? As the wheel wobbled and crossed the center line, the car swayed dangerously. If you die, he'll be the one to grieve. But he was completely wrong. His wife? His only family? Trying to threaten Baek Saeon with something like that was naive. Baek Saeon has no weaknesses. Using his wife to gain the upper hand was a dumb move. Heejoo knew the kidnapper's efforts would be in vain. At that precise moment, the persistent dial tone fell silent. The call was finally connected. Heejoo and the kidnapper's gazes met in midair. The more I think about it, the more annoyed I feel. Unlike the first, emotionless call, Baek Saeon's voice was now laced with irritation. I just wanted to hear your disgusting voice one more time. A sinister gleam of triumph flickered in the kidnapper's eyes. Sorry, but, how do I say this? My voice is, he chuckled, a grotesque melody escaping his lips. His distorted and thick voice echoed back. I used a voice changer. Do you like it? The kidnapper put his arm around Heejoo's shoulders and held the phone up to her mouth, gesturing for her to sing along. But thinking that Baek Saeon was on the other end left her tongue-tied again. You know, should we start with the money? How much do you think your wife's worth? A barely audible sigh hissed through his teeth. I'll keep this short. See you in court. Did you hear me? Huh. I said your wife. There won't be any ransom. Baek Saeon coldly silenced the kidnapper. You can use a voice filter if you want. You can sing your little songs, too. Call me when a body is found. His voice, sharp as a knife, cut through each word. Then, without a moment's hesitation, he ended the call. Beep, beep. The monotonous signal reminded her of a hospital monitor showing flat lines. The kidnapper's eyes bulged in anger as if they were about to burst. Heejoo bit her lips so hard it turned a ghastly white. No matter what, still, how could he not have even a shred of doubt? How could he not even try to listen? How could he? Hey, sis, did you hear that? That rude son of a bastard. Her voice cracked as it escaped her lips. A heavy weight settled on her chest as she opened her mouth, but when the words rushed out, it became a torrent she could no longer contain. The most sensitive part of her was being butchered. Call him again. The kidnapper was forced to stop his eye-rolling hearing Heejoo's words. What? I said, call him again. The simple act of speaking was a monumental challenge for Heejoo. A wave of heat surged through her, making her skin prickle. Sis? Ugh. Soon her fragile resolve crumbled to dust. It wasn't like she had ever dared to hope for anything in the first place. Make it 2 billion. What? My ransom. The kidnapper stared at her without even blinking. No, that's not my ransom, but the worth of his brand-like name. Heejoo floored the gas pedal, pushing the car to its limits. Beep, beep. As the signal tone resumed, Heejoo gritted her teeth. I'm not Baek Saeon's weakness. What? So that kind of emotional blackmail won't work on him. Her husband treated her as nothing. He was always indifferent, cold, and didn't even acknowledge her existence. His complete disregard for her was so thorough it bordered on obsession. To the point, it made Heejoo feel paranoid. Maybe it's because I'm not the biological daughter of Sanjeong. Because I'm just a young woman temporarily filling in his real fiancé's shoes. Becoming Baek Saeon's wife had been an unattainable dream from the start. Heejoo had resigned herself to her wilted hopes long before they could even begin. His callous indifference no longer caused pain. It was merely exhausting and predictable. Call me when a body is found. But then why? Why is it hurting me so much? Why does it feel like my world has fallen apart? He hates anything that could tarnish his reputation. Why do I feel so devastated and broken? He hasn't set foot in his residence in 5 years because he doesn't want any political entanglements. He's the kind of man who would sever even blood ties for his goals. To a man like that, a mere wife meant nothing. You picked the wrong hostage from the start. You should have taken his reputation, his public image, hostage instead. Baek Saeon was a man driven by ambition. Like most political figures, he was cunning and deeply aspirational. He despised relying on his parents' influence and wanted to build his own power base. His self-discipline was impeccable, and he allowed no flaws to taint his image. Perhaps that hunger for power was in his blood. When he announced his sudden move into the Blue House, Heejoo immediately understood what Saeon truly wanted. For 5 years, he had become the public face of the Blue House without a single scandal. At times, he wielded more recognition and trust than the president himself. The way to implicate such a perfect spokesperson was, hey, sis, are you helping me? Why are you helping me? What about Baek Saeon? That's... What? Heejoo glanced at the phone the kidnapper was using to negotiate. Is the voice filter on? Yeah. People wouldn't notice even if we took turns talking. She nervously licked her pale lips. Her sister, who had lost her hearing in an accident, took Heejoo everywhere. A young Heejoo, still carrying her recorder-filled school bag, had to sit between the two adults, acting as a bridge for nearly a decade. Whether through written notes or sign language, she spent years like a messenger. So don't provoke me. I'm barely hanging on to my sanity. Please. When did I start chanting this like a mantra? The in-laws, her own family, Baek Saeon, They all treated her like she didn't matter. Beep, beep. The tone stopped. Don't hang up, you piece of shit. A hoarse, trembling voice, fueled by rage, escaped Heejoo's lips. She could no longer bear the weight of the injustice she had suffered, and her pent-up anger exploded. If you don't want to be humiliated in front of the entire nation, you better talk. Tears spilled unexpectedly, and she wiped them roughly with her sleeve. She was lost in a whirlwind of feelings she couldn't comprehend. She never imagined that she would raise her voice, let alone talk with him in such a manner. Heejoo felt a sting of shame and a dull ache in her chest. Sir, wait, I forwarded the wrong. A new voice, flustered and stuttering, interrupted. What is this? Is this another threatening call? Hang up. It's not even worth listening to. It's just another obvious voice phishing scam. But sir, the person speaking is Assistant Park. I told you to hang up. I don't have time for this nonsense. The familiar voice grew distant, and the breathless assistant hurried to catch up. Even without seeing it, Heejoo could imagine the scene vividly. Don't go. Don't just walk away like that. Heejoo yelled after him. Baek-sayeon, you'll regret this. I'll expose your dirty personal life. As her voice rose to a crescendo of anger, a derisive laugh cut through the air. As a pathetic man hiding in some corner, the distant voice weighed heavily on the phone line. The biting criticism was eerily reminiscent of her husband's scornful remarks. Want to play a game of who's uglier? The words I said, when I see you in court, I'll make sure to treat you well. The call ended as harshly as Baek-sayeon's cold tone. The feeling of humiliation caused my hand and one side of my cheek to burn as if on fire. Call him back. Huh. Keep calling. Until he picks up. Sis. That. Heejoo felt like her bones were being shattered. The number you have dialed is currently switched off. After the tone, your call will be forwarded to voicemail. Please note that charges may apply for this call. Beep. Bastard. He's an asshole. He doesn't have an ounce of decency. A_ah. Sis. Look ahead. I was too occupied to hear anything. Heejoo could think about was her ugly contempt and lost control of the steering wheel. Why are you the only one who's okay? A tearing shout hit young Heejoo's body. She was only 9 back then. Her eyes had barely fluttered open after the accident. The first thing she saw was a white ceiling, and the stench of the hospital reached her nostrils. As I barely raised my upper body, the door slammed open and Kim Yun-hee staggered in. Mom. Heejoo was relieved to see her mother. But the moment she reached for her hand, her mother avoided her like a plague. How come you are the one who's fine? A look of terror spread across Kim Yun-hee's face, her lips trembling uncontrollably. Young Heejoo didn't quite understand. You should have got hurt as well. A cold chill ran down her spine, seeing her mother burst into tears. It was sadness, it was anger, and most prominently, it was fear. Her mother was terrified. She was scared for her daughter, who woke up unharmed except for a few scars. Mom. Mom. Yun-hee looked at her like some bug. Oh. Dear God. Why? She shouted, covering her face. Hong's biological daughter, Hong Yin-ah, had her ears injured by an iron pipe through a glass window, and the babysitter who was traveling with her youngest son died. He was the only child born from her miraculous remarriage from living as a mistress. The car they were traveling in collided with a cargo truck on a bridge, and her child, Heejoo, was the only one who was unharmed. If the chairman finds out, Kim Yun-hee cried, her face contorted in shame. His biological daughter is deaf and his pampered son is dead, and only you. My biological daughter is still alive. Mom shook like a kite without a string. Even if he doesn't say it directly, do you think it was easy to find a man like him? Do you know how much I struggled to reach here? Mom. He'll be angry when he sees you unscathed, and then he'll hate me, I'm sure of it. Kim Yun-hee was talking to herself, or maybe not. She was pacing the hospital room, biting her nails, and it was hysterical to watch. She put a hand on Heejoo's shoulder and said harshly, You're in shock from the accident. My daughter, you're traumatized. You're not supposed to be okay. No, you can't be fine. It would be better if you didn't say anything. Mom. Get a grip. Do you want to live in the back room of the club? Heejoo couldn't even breathe from the whip-like scolding. She helplessly watched as a gag seemed to be stuffed into her own mouth. From today on, you will never, ever say anything. Mom. The shock was too much to bear. You might seem fine externally, but your head. This head of yours isn't functioning well. Yun-hee's eyes narrowed as she pressed the side of Heejoo's head. You must never, ever say another word, Hong Heejoo. If you want to continue living as Hong, if you want to stay with your mom, you mustn't speak up. Just like the little mermaid you saw in the theater. Remember? Mom. I'm scared. Why are you so tactless? Kim Yun-hee slapped Heejoo across her cheeks. Do you want to go back to living in a dumpster? Heejoo froze, tears welling up in her eyes. The corner of her lip was torn. Your sister will never hear from you again, and your brother is dead. Heejoo was shocked by the bitterness in her mother's voice. Do you want to speak? Heejoo tried to say no, but just shook her head according to her mother's words. To avoid being scolded, she hurriedly wiped the tears from her eyes. The chairman must take pity on you so you and Mom can live. The child nodded, not knowing what to say. Until when? Heejoo's nose was red as she silently mouthed her question, like what you saw in the movies. Until the end of time. With a forced smile and tear-streaked face, her mother whispered the same thing. The sound of all the rain covered the soggy memory. First it was hearing. Then she slowly recovered her sense of touch and later sight. Heejoo blinked dazedly, ignoring the throbbing pain. I was in an accident. The car, slipping on the rain-slicked road, careened off the road and struck a barrier before rolling into the barrier. The side of the car was crumpled like a piece of paper. She was now alone in the mangled car as the kidnapper had already escaped. Heejoo was lying motionless and taking shallow breaths. My emotions, my situation, my life were a jumbled mess. Everything was bothering me to no end. Where did I go wrong? I pretended to be aphasic and kept my mouth shut. This event caused the chairman's sadness, strengthened my bond with my sister, and further alienated Heejoo from the rest of the family. For a long time, Heejoo clung to the false hope that staying quiet would keep everyone happy. As a child, this burden easily caused her to be lethargic and depressed. She was crushed by the weight of it, and at some point, she really couldn't speak. I was scared to death to raise my voice in front of others. Man. Just then, the radio, which had been lying dormant, crackled to life. In an official statement released at 5:55 p.m., the Blue House declared that the negotiations had been successful. My head turned to the dashboard. I would like to thank the families of the captives, the people, and the media for their active cooperation in enduring the painful times. The low-pitched voice shattered her dazed mind instantly. Each of his words pierced her ears more painfully than the pouring rain. Heejoo unconsciously clenched her fist. I will take all necessary measures to ensure that the captives return to their families as soon as possible. It started with a small chuckle, but soon it erupted into full-blown laughter. There was still a tear hanging from Heejoo's eyes. Now her mother's words made sense. Until the end, a shattered expectation, and the sound of something breaking inside her reverbed. After all, we've made it this far. In addition to that, I would like to express my deepest condolences to the families of the two men who lost their lives in this latest kidnapping. His voice was incredibly polite, firm, and loyal, something that was never directed to me. These glass windows felt like prison bars. Heejoo gritted her teeth and pulled her leg out from under the car. She picked up whatever she could get her hands on and began smashing out the windows. A hardened, almost venomous expression twisted her face. Bang, bang, bang. The car was filled with the ceaseless sound of the hammering. I want to create a home. A place that's entirely mine, not a newlywed home, my parents' place, or my in-laws. I want to build a sanctuary where I can be myself. The glass window, which was already more than half shattered, quickly fell to the ground. After relentlessly punching through the remaining pieces, Heejoo managed to crawl out. She leaned against the distorted bonnet and laughed hysterically. The cold raindrops felt oddly refreshing. There was still a month to go until her father-in-law's election campaigns. A gentle smile blossomed on Heejoo's face as her gaze fell upon her hands. I've had enough. Let's abandon this pitiful situation with no regrets. There's no way he's going to pay $2 billion as a ransom. Heejoo's gaze intensified as she studied her heavy palm. The kidnapper's altar device was in her possession. We have to get divorced if I want to blackmail an elite spokesperson and sound like the previous kidnapper. Ahem. She cleared her throat as she ate her leisurely dinner. How many years have I felt this motivated? The mere thought of threatening Baek Saeon seemed to revitalize her. I smiled as I stirred my rice alone at the table. My stiff shoulders ached, but determination outweighed the pain. We also thank the Argan government and the international community, including friendly countries and international organizations, for their cooperation in the release of the hostages, said the spokesperson of the Blue House, Baek Saeon. Throughout the day, the news showed footage of Saeon over and over again. The revelation of his media-manipulated negotiations with the Argan militants shocked the public. Heejoo quickly switched off the TV. A flicker of awareness passed across her face as she looked up. A sharp click sounded as the door sealed shut, followed by the soft scuffle of slippers. A sense of unease washed over Heejoo as she strained to hear the man's footsteps. The workaholic who always leaves work at midnight. Why did he come home so early? The tall, striking silhouette came around the corner and stopped walking. Heejoo froze, still holding her cutlery. A casual, unconcerned glance was exchanged. It could be termed as a passing glance. From Saeon's reaction, it felt like there were only furniture and objects in front of him. But Baek Saeon was staring in her direction with a slight frown on his face. His gaze, searching and critical, made Heejoo uncomfortable. But I don't want to let things slide anymore. After regaining her composure, She opened her mouth to bite down on her cutlery. She scraped the spoon with her incisors, gathering the rice, and still managed to meet his gaze. Sion arched his eyebrow. Today. A low, hoarse voice broke the silence. His gaze lingered near Heejoo's face for a long time. I received a trivial call. She abandoned her wrecked car, walked up the hill without a pair of shoes, came home, showered, cried a little, and tore off her soiled clothes. Only her throbbing body told her it wasn't a dream. Was he calling the whole thing trivial? Someone was threatening to K***. Heejoo simply scooped up the rice and nonchalantly took a bite. She actually came back from the dead. But you seem alive. His voice was dry and devoid of emotion. Still, there was something subtly off about him. Heejoo poured water down her throat to ignore the abnormality. He narrowed his eyes searchingly and glared at her. Heejoo couldn't tell if he was reprimanding her or annoyed. His unreadable gaze swept over her once again. Fortunately, the kidnapper's stupidity prevented a worse outcome. What if her cries for help were silenced forever? What if the criminal did something worse to her? She deftly suppressed another sob. Heejoo didn't want to show the slightest sign of emotion in front of Sion. It doesn't matter. She thought she had grown numb to such remarks, but his words struck differently when paired with that direct gaze. Unlike on TV, there was no camera lens, no editing, no barrier between her and the overwhelming presence of Sion. His words, now raw and unfiltered, cut deeper than ever. Biting her lower lip, she suppressed the unexpected surge of frustration. Why do you think I married someone as young as you? Shrugging off his suit jacket, he draped it over a chair. The exhaustion from his long day was visible on his face as he loosened his tie and unbuttoned his collar. Because you're quiet. To Heejoo, it sounded like he married her because she wasn't a bother. After removing his watch, he let out a heavy sigh, his face betraying the weariness of the day. If you get it, don't think of bringing up such things ever again. It was almost like a threat, but too bad. A faint flush rose to Heejoo's cheeks as she thought, from now on, I'm going to drive you absolutely insane. Heejoo felt excited just thinking about it. 1. The bride cannot ask for a divorce first. 2. The couple can't get divorced, especially during the presidential election. The goal was to make Sion propose the divorce within a month. This was the only way to unwind this marriage without a fuss. If I could just get that one word out of Sion's mouth dash. This should be the perfect method. A plan was already in action and Heejoo had to hone her blackmailing skills for it. I won't go easy on people who dare to mess. Sion clicked his tongue as he noticed the odd blush on his wife's cheeks. The silence between them was no longer the same as before. What happened to the task I asked you to look into? Sion entered a stark, lifeless room devoid of a single living plant. The black matte flooring and dark interior exuded an air of dryness and gloom. Sir, well, did she always eat at home? The savory smell of rice wafting from the house felt artificial. The man sat on the edge of the bed, running his hand over his now irritable face. The fatigue he had been ignoring seemed to flood him all at once. Sion wiped at his warm forehead and closed his eyes with a measured calm. This house, quiet as the depths of the ocean, was his one sanctuary free of noise or chaos. Returning to such a space softened the nerves that had been on edge the entire day. I told you not to stammer during reports. I'm sorry, sir. It seems we can't trace it. His previously closed eyes opened sharply, and a faint crease formed between his brows. Since the call didn't go through a cellular tower, the number alone isn't traceable. It's a US area code, and apparently it's a virtual number. So the only option is real-time tracking. Real-time? The words caused him to furrow. Yes, but for that, we'd need another call to come in. The perfect lines of his face, so often admired, were now marred by a grimace of pain. Sion sneered as he stood, his voice laced with contempt. The one spewing nonsense about K***ing a public official's wife. See, considering the lengths they went to avoid being traced, it's unlikely they'll back down easily. The motives seem entirely different. The timing of the threatening call was too coincidental, almost calculated. The hostage situation wasn't just a matter of personal safety. It affected the nation's prestige. If Sion or the government failed, there were plenty of parties who would revel in the chaos. It was possible that someone had staged the threat to derail the negotiation efforts. Even if it was just voice phishing, the execution was disturbingly methodical. The call was made using a US-based number, which allows them to manipulate the caller ID. With this level of effort, Sion pressed his tongue against the inside of his cheek and smiled inwardly. They might call again. He strode toward the towering bookshelf in his study with long strides. The stress of recent events had been mounting, but in a way, he welcomed this. If they dared to use the same lines in another call, that very day, Sion would turn them into his personal punching bag. If the call comes through, try to extend the conversation as long as possible. I know you're highly skilled at this, sir, but they suggest drawing out personal details. It's a man. He tossed the words out carelessly as he paced in front of the bookshelf. Pardon? But the voice was modulated. It's a man. I'm sure of it. Why, yes, understood. Probably drugged, high, or otherwise out of his mind, too. A wall of the room was entirely lined with shelves, packed tightly with materials on negotiation. Baek Sa-yeon had a background that included participation in the FBI Academy training program during his master's degree in political science and completion of a hostage negotiation course led by the NYPD. When dealing with hostages, 9 out of 10 trainees got emotionally swayed. But Baek Sa-yeon didn't flinch, not at the provocations of a perpetrator, nor at the barrel of a gun. The foundation of negotiation was interpersonal understanding. An exceptional negotiator needed the ability to disarm their counterpart using empathy as a weapon. Yet Baek Sa-yeon had entirely subverted this principle with cold indifference and calculated, unethical questions. Meticulously manipulating emotional state was an approach that deviated significantly from the qualities of an ideal negotiator. Instead of focusing on the safety of the hostage, he derived pleasure from breaking down the hostage-taker. Recognizing her son's deficit in empathy, his mother prohibited him from pursuing the field. You're just a person with a swift tongue, not a negotiator. That was her cold verdict. Ironically, that very skill set became the foundation that propelled him to prominence as a political strategist. A sneaky rat that can't even expose his own voice. A rhythmic tapping echoed as his rough voice rasped through the air. Heejoo couldn't take her eyes off the monitor. I'll silence you forever. She mimicked the line with a deliberately solemn expression. Her face hardened, and her jaw stiffened. She was mirroring the actor's hostility. At the Sign Language Interpretation Center's media room, Heejoo's hands moved swiftly, flawlessly fluid in their motions. If you dare to do anything, I'll K***le you. Her neatly shaped eyebrows twitched, mimicking the anger of the actor's expression. Today was the day. Tonight, she will call Baek Sa-yeon. As a sign language interpreter, Heejoo was adept at conveying others' tones and emotions with precision. Her years of practicing interpretations using a variety of media had made imitating a hostage-taker almost effortless. Heejoo, you came? The head of the center peeked through the slightly open door while stammering. On the monitor, a terrifying man was threatening a bruised figure hanging from the ceiling, spitting out lines about flaying skin and other horrors. Heejoo, hey. Heejoo? The flustered man in his early 40s stepped into the room, but Heejoo remained engrossed. She kept moving her arms. Have your tastes changed or something? A flustered Heejoo finally turned to face the man. Standing there in a Hawaiian shirt and a long gold chain that would suit a rapper, the man blinked in disbelief. Is this because you had to let go of the broadcast job? I'm just practicing, Heejoo expressed through sign language. If her gestures carried a voice, it would have been soft, graceful, and poised, like that of a well-mannered lady. But why is your practice material so grim? Just in case. In case? Of what? The man looked at her with concern. Nothing's come in from the police or anything, right? No debt collector hired you because the debtor is deaf or... No. Then why are you doing this? You're scaring me here. The head expressed himself dramatically while clutching his chest. I'm looking for new jobs for you, so just take it easy until then, and don't blow off steam with such morbid stuff, okay? Heejoo was only a halfway sign language interpreter. Her chronic inability to speak in front of others severely limited her opportunities. Sign language wasn't just about moving your hands. Her lip movements, brow arches, and body angles were deliberate and precise. Though her presence was usually faint, her ability to vividly convey emotions was undeniable. Yet it was all the more tragic that she, a messenger for others, couldn't fully express herself. A sign language interpreter who couldn't speak could only ever be half complete. Heejoo, if this is just to hone your skills, you could practice it with Baek Sa-yeon's videos. She looked innocent, like a college student, but from beneath the brim of her cap, there was something unsettling in her gaze. Brushing off the chill, he added hastily, Baek Sa-yeon's been doing a lot of briefings lately. I could grab some of those videos for you. Didn't you say his clarity in speech was textbook material? And back when you kept failing your certification tests, didn't you tell me that even being in the same frame as Baek Sa-yeon, even for 1/16 of a second, was your dream? Suddenly, Heejoo stepped forward without a word. The man instinctively took a step back as she snatched the remote from his hand. I'm done with Baek Sa-yeon's videos. I've had enough. Oh, okay. Her decisive thoughts left him dumbfounded. Heejoo returned her focus to the grim movie, her hands and expressions flawlessly replicating the profane, violent lines. From her fierce determination and inexplicable obsession, the man in the room felt uneasy. Seriously, what's this about? This wasn't the Heejoo he used to know, the timid, faint-hearted girl. Her dull eyes now gleamed with an almost unsettling sharpness. The head shivered, noticing. Finally, Heejoo's legs kept shaking as she stared at the phone sitting idly on the desk. She never in her wildest dreams thought her first voice interpretation job would be a threatening phone call. Voice modulation, spoofed caller ID, untraceable location. For days now, the phone had received exactly 0 calls. Amazingly, the hostage taker had been right. Baek Sion couldn't discover a thing. Whether he had lost interest in the prank calls or simply couldn't find the trail, her life remained perfectly intact despite holding onto the hostage taker's phone. Her daily routine hadn't changed one bit. The man who had once bared his soul to her now dismissed her with a chilling indifference. Whenever their eyes accidentally met, his face would harden first. She still couldn't decipher what his expression meant. Was it disapproval? A hint of unease? Either way, his sharp gaze pierced through her like a blade. If that was the case, there was only one thing left for her to do. Heejoo set the timer for 9 minutes and took a deep breath. Every movement drew a reflexive groan of pain from her. Ugh. The bruises were still making her suffer. A wave of bitterness washed over her, but the fleeting emotion was swiftly replaced by her unyielding resolve. Everything was ready now. Her trembling voice, shaky like a goat's bleat, clawed its way out of her throat. The only son of a presidential frontrunner, a media manipulator renowned for his barbed tongue. I could never hope to win against someone like him, but that didn't matter. This was it. Time to embrace her role as the defiant divorcee. Reciting her mantra, she steeled her gaze and pressed the phone to her ear. Beep, beep. The irretrievable sound of the ringing echoed, and her heart pounded violently as if trying to tear through a drum. It was 10 p.m., and her husband still hadn't returned home. A tense expression marred Heejoo's face as she absently toyed with her necklace. Am I doing the right thing? And no. I can do this, right? What had begun with sheer willpower and stubbornness was now about to take shape. Yet, as her carefully laid plans materialized, her thoughts began to falter. Her teeth chattered from tension. Maybe I should have taken something for this beforehand? Beep, beep. The seemingly endless ringing sounded like a precarious countdown. Every passing second was a torturous reminder of her former helplessness. Finally, as her breath grew short and dizziness set in, the ringing stopped abruptly. Her tightly shut eyes twitched at the sudden silence. It worked. He answered. Calm down. I have to stay calm. As she inhaled to speak her first word. Is my wife dying at your hands again today? Cough. Cough. Heejoo was startled, and her face twisted in dismay. His mocking tone had already shifted the balance of power. D***M in it. This wasn't the start she wanted. You sound quite shocked. And no, and not at all. She attempted to mimic the flustered hostage-taker from before, but her words tangled effortlessly on their own. Thankfully, the voice modulation seemed to be working well enough, as Baek Sion remained calm. Then let's hear your plan to harm me, shall we? How did he recognize her? Did he memorize every number that was received and eliminate possibilities? You're keeping my wife safe, aren't you? She was the one supposed to be issuing threats, yet he was laughing at her instead. Don't get swept up. Stay in control. Biting her stiff tongue, Heejoo took a deep breath. Who said she's your wife? She felt a pang in her heart, but decided to ignore it. Taking back control of the conversation was all that mattered now. You abandoned your longtime fiancé and married your soon-to-be sister-in-law. The air slowly turned tense. That's what I'm planning to expose. Finally, Heejoo brought out the weapon to attack her husband, a crack in Baek Sion's supposedly flawless moral image. This was the first scenario she had prepared. You don't even know where your original fiancé is now, do you? Her sister, who had vanished without a trace before her wedding day, hadn't been heard from in 3 years. The chairman, driven by desperation, had dispatched a search team, his frustration growing with each passing day. Her sister's absence loomed over everyone equally. That gave Heejoo plenty of room to fabricate. I wonder what happened to her. Did you have a hand in it? Of course, there was some exaggeration, but the truth didn't matter. What mattered was sticking the labels on him. Innocence, once lost, is irretrievable. A single rumor would suffice to tarnish his reputation. Baek Sion wouldn't tolerate a stain on his pristine image. You used one sister one after another. Conveniently. And now, suddenly one of them is missing? People will love this story. Their darling Baek Sion, the articulate spokesperson, turns out to be so filthy, perverted, and trashy. I'm sure the public will enjoy this with relish. Such a scandal, entangled with family, wasn't just weird. It was downright taboo. In a society where ability and morality were hard to separate, the fervent trust in him would return as scathing condemnation. Baek Sion wasn't naive enough to ignore the gravity. What do you want? Good. That's more like it. Heejoo was finally satisfied with his tone. Without missing a beat, she replied. Before I expose everything, you'll fix this yourself. Be specific. Ditch Hong Heejoo and bring back your original fiancé. Restore everything to how it should have been. Besides, you don't need Hong Heejoo anyway. Heejoo's expression was twisted already. But the unbearable satisfaction distorted her face further. She wasn't even the one meant as your partner. Heejoo never expected her long-standing inferiority complex to become a bargaining chip for her escape. The exhilarating defiance was new. Do you understand? If you don't want your father's campaign drowned in filth, put things back in order. You can do that much easily, can't you? The man stayed silent. Baek wasn't the type to throw away his political career at its infancy, and this was Heejoo's chance to seize the upper hand. A man headed for parliament, crumbling right here? Over one dirty scandal? Could you even forgive yourself? Get real, bro. Do the math yourself. Maybe this was why people wore masks in kidnapping scenes. The shrill, sly voice she had projected was scary even to herself. Imagine your father, the next president, being humiliated by your antics. Who would want a man with no loyalty, no conscience, and no decency as the government's representative? It won't be a small blotch, but something that would end your career. The words burst out like fireworks. Heejoo spun around in place, savoring the unprecedented sense of liberation. You have until tomorrow to decide. To top it off, she let out a nasty laugh, echoing back into her ear. The timid second daughter of Sankyung Daily was gone. Now, she was a nameless, ageless, jobless blackmailer. Or, you can settle for 2 billion won. It's cheaper than having your personal life exposed. For Heejoo, whether it was divorce or 2 billion won, neither choice would be a loss. I'll call again tomorrow. She glanced at the timer. For a first call, this wasn't bad at all. Her demands were clear, and her threats struck directly at his perfectionism. Now was the time to hang up. Ending the call decisively would assert who held control of the conversation. She moved to press the disconnect button, without hesitation. Are you done? A screeching sound of a chair being pushed back suddenly interrupted her. All that build-up, and this is the grand threat you came up with? The man let out what sounded like a mix of a sigh and a sneer. His drawn-out voice carried a hint of boredom. It amazes me how people like you never change your repertoire. His muttered words of disdain made her freeze. If I claim that a lunatic is targeting me, that's the end of it. I'll discredit you as a deranged societal menace, and your argument would be invalid. Do you want this to remain as a phishing scam, or stretch it out to be something more? In just a few words, he had turned the tables, while exposing a vulnerability she hadn't even considered. Heejoo's lips trembled faintly. If you want to attempt blackmail, start by studying me first. A surge of humiliation welled up, and she bit her lower lip in silence. Hundreds of journalists have tried to make me talk. What makes you think you'll succeed? She had never expected to defeat him easily. Was it her overconfidence in the years she had spent observing him? She thought she had known him well enough. Her moment of triumph was cruelly cut short by the exposure of her hidden arrogance. It's a simple matter to downplay this as an unlucky misunderstanding instead of a scandal. Taking down an amateur blackmailer like you? That's child's play. It felt as though an invisible finger was jabbing her forehead repeatedly. But why would I? His voice, previously exuding ennui, suddenly turned cold and sharp. Why would I entertain the audacity of your demands to abandon my wife? Why would I push the person in the dirt I've tried to protect? My wife. The words were infuriating, even enraging. Heejoo let out an incredulous huff. In the previous call, he was waiting for a corpse. And now he's suddenly playing the devoted husband? Whether he had realized she was recording him or had some other hidden agenda, she couldn't tell. His sudden shift to a protective role clearly undermined her progress. Why you? Did you check Hong Heejoo's car? What nonsense are you about to spew now? She had it scrapped. Baek stayed silent, as if trying to parse her words for meaning. Did you even know? And you call her my wife? The satisfaction of hurling those words at him made her feel vindicated. Do you still think this is a game? That I'm some loser stuck in my room? That night, I had your wife's hair, her neck, even her lips in my grasp. I could have kept her trapped. She was scared. No, she was terrified. The thrill of using his painful memories against him was intoxicating. It was a twisted satisfaction, but it felt like a weight had been lifted from her chest. Huh. Go on. Continue. So I stabbed her in the cheek with a knife. Is this how things are supposed to go? A strange, tingling sensation prickled from her cheeks to the tips of her ears. And then, you hung up on me, remember? That's when things escalated. What did you do? I don't even remember everything because of how intense it was, but she started it. She just went crazy. She must have gotten some serious bruises. She was soaking wet and her clothes were ruined. A sharp, cutting laugh echoed faintly, almost too faint to catch. Hello? Are you still there? Goosebumps crept up from her neck. It wasn't her imagination, but no matter how long she waited, there was no response from the other end of the line. Heejoo winced as she rotated her sore shoulder. In the midst of debating whether to call out to him, I've never been this curious about a man's face before. Forget about peaceful surrendering. This is going to be amusing. His disinterest, once palpable, evaporated, replaced by a focused intensity. The sudden shift in intensity left Heejoo flustered. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. What she wanted was cooperation, not abnormal curiosity. More precisely, she wasn't expecting a disturbing fixation on the blackmailer. What had gone wrong? What had she missed? A chill crawled up the back of her neck, the kind that made her feel like prey under a predator's gaze. At that moment, the timer she had set to 9 minutes blared. Damn it! She frantically pressed the end call button. First call, D2P. Was this a complete failure, or did it somehow work? Her heart pounded in trepidation. Shortly after hanging up, the door lock beeped and clicked open. Oh no! A surge of panic propelled Heejoo towards her room. The brazen confidence she had while on the call disappeared, as though it had been nothing but intoxicated bravado. Pressing her ear against the door, she tried to guess his movements. Phew! The silence outside suggested he had gone to his room. Heejoo slid down against the door, as the tension gradually dissipated. What was I thinking? What have I done? Hong Heejoo, you're insane. She had actually done it. She had actually called her husband to blackmail him. Her hands trembled as she gripped her phone tightly. Then came a knock. Hong Heejoo, come out. Did Baek Sion ever come to this room? Had he caught on? But how? She kept staring at the closed door in panic. Scrambling, she hid the negotiation phone under her pillow. I'm coming in. Another knock followed, indifferent and perfunctory. He clearly wasn't waiting for permission as the door swung open immediately. Sion stood expressionless. Against the ivory wallpaper, his figure was striking. His gaze scanned Heejoo from head to toe. No way. Did he figure something out? She swallowed hard. Bzzz. Bzzz. The vibrating phone in his jacket pocket broke the tension. Without breaking eye contact, Sion retrieved his phone. The fluidity of his movements, from unbuttoning his coat to swiping the screen, was unnervingly smooth. Even while on the call, he gave no verbal response, merely listening. Words like scrapped, confirm, drifted faintly from the speaker, likely he was talking to a subordinate. After ending the call, he let out a dry laugh. Come closer. Had she misheard him? When she stayed rooted in place, he crooked 2 fingers impatiently. The mix of irritation and annoyance on his face was oddly unfamiliar. Before she could react, he grabbed her arm and yanked her forward. Ah! Heejoo bit her lip to suppress a gasp. Sion turned her arm this way and that, inspecting small scratches. Tugging down her loose shirt, he examined the bruises on her shoulder, then tilted her face to check her scalp. His touch was devoid of gentleness. What's this? His gaze lingered on the rounded contours of her shoulder. I asked you a question, Hong Heejoo. What is this? She silently adjusted her shirt, unsure how to answer. Well, even if you ask, I can't speak. She had a pretty good idea of what he was doing. He was verifying the blackmailer's claims. But why? Whether she was injured or not shouldn't matter to Baek Sion. Confusion flickered across her face. If you can't answer, just nod or shake your head when I ask. He pressed his temples briefly before correcting his tone. Was there a car accident? His hardened gaze remained locked on hers. She nodded. At her small movement, his expression twisted. You really went through an accident. Did it happen on October 6th, sometime between 5 and 6 p.m.? When he uttered the exact date and time, Heejoo flinched for a split second, but her expression remained unshaken. She kept her face as lifeless and melancholic as usual. And you even had the car scrapped? With his hands on his hips, he lowered his head. His chest swelled and deflated like he was taking a deep breath, though no sound of suppressed breathing escaped him. So, you're saying you really got hurt that day? That bastard really? His muttered words were chilling enough to make her shiver. It seemed he was finally beginning to believe the blackmailer's claims, realizing that the call had been anything but a prank. His previously detached expression began to contort, slowly but unmistakably. Heejoo watched the change unfold right before her eyes. Finally, the threat she had aimed at him had finally hit its mark. There must have been someone who approached you. He suddenly leaned closer. Did you see the guy's face? Startled by his icy glare, she instinctively shook her head. She moved her hands as if trying to explain, miming someone putting on a mask. He wore a mask, so you couldn't see his face? To her surprise, he immediately understood her fumbling gestures. She nodded fervently, maintaining her innocent act despite having actually seen the man. That bastard. What did he do? His tone was so low and flat it barely qualified as a question. Head, lips, cheekbone. His slow, deliberate gaze traced over the areas he murmured. Did he touch you anywhere else? The car even rolled off. His calm voice turned sharper mid-sentence. You crashed and ended up soaking wet. Heejoo clenched the hem of her pants, wondering why he was pressing her like this. I don't even hold any value as a hostage. Her mind was filled with question marks as she tried to make sense of his apparent concern for her. Even after all that, why didn't you tell me? Baek Saeon spoke through gritted teeth, his words coming out in clipped fragments. He said he would ask questions that could be answered with a yes or no. By the time she looked back at him, his expression had already returned to its usual neutral state. As she stared at him in silence, his gaze narrowed. For a fleeting moment, she realized it had been a long time since they had looked each other in the eye like this. Heejoo quietly tapped her empty ring finger, then pointed at him before miming a hand around her neck. His sharp gaze turned razor-like. He clearly understood what she was implying. I was sent here as your hostage. No matter what, she was still a hostage. What use would it have been to tell him anything? She shrugged lightly, as if to say, it wouldn't have mattered either way. I'll assign a bodyguard to you. Stick with him for now. Heejoo's eyes widened as she'd been swallowing her frustration. She crossed her arms in an X and shook her head vigorously. Baek Saeon's eyebrow arched slightly at her reaction. Doesn't matter if you don't want to. He tugged irritably at his once immaculate tie. It won't take long. Was that confidence in his ability to resolve this quickly? I'll book a hospital appointment. You'll get checked. Heejoo stared at him with conflicted eyes, trying to decipher his intentions. Baek Saeon rubbed the back of his neck, his gaze sweeping over her room. The small bed and desk, the thick stacks of books and glossy monitor, the pastel stool and the dainty vanity. His indifferent eyes lingered on each piece of furniture, steeped in traces of daily life. That piece of shit. He cursed under his breath. She had heard him use thousands of polished, formal words on news broadcasts, during speeches, and even on the Blue House podium. But hearing such an unfiltered expletive from him up close was a first. So, he wants to play games with me. Heejoo flinched involuntarily at his words. But seeing his reaction now, she was certain of one thing. My plan worked. That's the end of chapters 1 to 10. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe to D2P, the channel for those too lazy to watch or read for the next exciting chapters.